I think with regards to students, our policy towards student debt is probably one that will interest most people, because our plan is to write off all existing student debt and all current student debt, and to look at major reinvestment back into higher education so that it is a free service available for all, because education should be a right, not a privilege.
How will we fund that?
There are many different ways that we look at this. One of the major ways we're really looking to fund most of our policies is through clamping down on tax avoidance, stopping things like the Mayfair loophole, which is, I mean, this culture of tax avoidance is allowed to run rampant on successive governments, and it's something that needs to end, because conservative estimates put the figure around 25 billion a year. Other estimates can put it all the way up to maybe 70 billion a year, and I think this is something that if that money could be pulled back to our economy, it would be of great benefit and could be used where it's needed, not only in education but the NHS and all throughout public services. Well, that loophole hasn't existed the whole time. It's through deregulation of the financial industry, both under the Thatcher Conservative government back in the 1980s, and then further in 2010 by the Blair and Brown Labour government, that's allowed these things to essentially escalate in many ways. The financial industry used to be a lot more regulated, and it's through that deregulation that's allowed people to go into tax avoidance. It's allowed these schemes to come through, and it's something that, to be fair, if there is appropriate legislation and if there's a government that has the will, not just the words, then I think that this can be achieved. We look to increasing the minimum wage to £8 an hour, raising to £10 an hour by 2020. We'd also look to introduce, this isn't something in our direct policies for this election, but something of our long-term strategy called the citizens' income. Now, on a personal level, the benefit system, I believe, is very unfair. It's stacked against those actually on benefits, and especially the targets that have been put into place recently had a massively detrimental effect. And in fact, I think have done a lot of damage, especially when you look at things like ATOS and the workfare assessments for disabled people. Now, we drive towards, with the citizens' income, instead of having a benefit system, you would actually have a citizens' income of £80 a week per person in the UK. That way, whether the people are in work or not, they would be able to fall back onto that, so they would be able to support their daily living expenses and rent as well. Yeah, essentially. Obviously, there would be supplementary amounts for people who are disabled or those with special needs. But yeah, that would basically get rid of all benefits, and irrespective of how much you're earning, you would get that, because we need to create an equal society, and to do that, there needs to be an equal base point. If somebody wants to make a lot of money and wants to work really hard, that should be open to them. But say on the other side that somebody wants to be an artist and devote themselves to creating beautiful pieces and beautiful works of art, which can have a lot of benefit in society as well, they shouldn't be penalised for that. In fact, they should have that facility. That will be looked at, because obviously we're talking about including the pensions, we're including the existing benefit system into that, so we'll be able to pull that money and then reappropriate it and then bring it out as the citizens' income. As I say though, this is part of our long-term plan. In the initial period, it's something we'd have to look and reassess, because obviously we can only really implement these once we've had a good look at the books. A good example to use of this is in Seattle in America. They recently raised the wages for all service sector users, so that's people working in bars, restaurants, cafes, to $15 an hour, and exactly the same arguments were put forward by people saying that it closed those businesses down, they wouldn't be able to afford to pay their staff. Very interestingly, they've seen a massive increase in the revenue of those restaurants and bars, because suddenly the people who work there are able to go out to those restaurants and bars, and that money is being directly reinvested back into the local economy. So I think it's a case of, if people have more money, they will spend that money. So that it's, money is quite a circular thing. You earn it, you spend it, so that it would boost the economy rather than reduce it. Yeah, I mean, I'm actually got a background in petroleum geology, and thus I've been very vocal in the anti-fracking movement over the past few years, because I have a very good understanding of how dangerous that is. And that's just another example, though, of the drive of successive governments that claim that they're going to move towards renewables and that we're in the transition period, but they keep driving towards fossil fuel-based industries. Now, the Green Party doesn't just look at renewables as something that we want to promote. We want to create an entire industry based around that in the UK. So that's installation, manufacturing, and maintenance. And so that would create a lot of more jobs. It would also create true energy independence, because if we want energy independence, we should look at creating small-scale, publicly owned and publicly funded solar, wind, water, tidal, wherever appropriate, energy reclamation systems.
Take decades to introduce.
Not potentially. I mean, there's been a marked increase of, I think it's something like 70% to 100% increase in the solar installation year by year as we've gone on in the past 5 years. Though don't quote me on that figure. I was not what I know off the top of my head. But it's a case that it may take decades. But at the same time, we're not saying that it's something that would happen overnight. We'd actually aim to be a fully renewable-based country by 2050, or essentially a carbon-neutral country by 2050. So it's a long-term plan again. I agree on that point you're making there, but I would say this, that the waste that is produced by nuclear power is horrendously radioactive, as many people will obviously know, and it takes a long time to decay. And I've actually been inside something called NIREX, which was the British government strategy to dispose of nuclear waste, was to store it in facilities in the Cornish granite. And we couldn't do it because simply the granites were too porous, too much water would flow through. So we still have no actual credible way of storing this waste safely. So for me, I personally think that nuclear has a future in the transition towards renewables, but I also believe that it's an industry that, once again, we don't have enough. We look to the actual energy creation, but the byproducts and the actual wastage and then the dismantling of these nuclear facilities is something that I don't think a lot of people factor into the cost. And I think that's where the danger lies, is that the byproducts of this industry is something that we are, not only will we have to live with, but 1,000 generations to come.
But you would be interested in it if it was to phase out fossil fuels?
Yeah, well, as I say, we want to transition. At the end of the day, a lot of people think that we're going to make this cut, but that is impossible to do. Our society works in certain ways, and it will take time. But yeah, I see nuclear as other energy forms of generation that aren't renewable as those that will allow us to move on eventually into that transition to being carbon neutral. This is actually an area where I don't differ with the Green Party policy, but I think it's something that needs to be investigated a lot further. I actually grew up within 500 metres of the second largest animal vivisection lab in Britain. And I will say this, the smell from their incinerators when they used to dispose of the bodies on site was one of the most horrendous things I have ever smelled. And I understand the case for complete banning on testing, and I actually, where there is any animal cruelty that is unnecessary, it should be stopped. But I also understand the nature that we do need to test drugs, we do need to be able to test life-saving cures. So it's one that I think we need to look into further, and might be a policy that might change in the future, but that's just on a personal level. As it stands though, I do stand with the Green Party in trying to phase out any, especially cosmetic animal testing. As I say, it's something I think that needs a lot more thought and needs discussion with people who actually work in the industry as well. The Green Party are the only party that has the people's welfare at its heart. We want to stop the privatisation of the NHS. We want to reinvigorate the welfare system. And when I say welfare system, I don't just mean benefits, but I mean adult social care, child social care. We want to actually create a positive economy that is based for all, not based for the 1%, not based for the neoliberal corporate masters who, to be fair, do have far too much sway currently in Parliament. The Green Party is a vote for people, not for politicians. We're people who want to make a change.